The story began in 1930s Mississippi, where young Sammy led a hard life picking cotton and living in a humble home with his parents and several sisters. Unlike Sammy, his cousins, stylish and ambitious, had just returned to their hometown to do business. They were the Moore twins, Stack and Smoke, and their eyes were set on acquiring an old lumber yard. The current owner of the property, Hogwood, was an unpleasant and openly racist man. He didn't hide his contempt for the two, speaking to them with disrespect. The atmosphere turned tense as both sides reached for their pistols, but Hogwood, suddenly nervous, claimed he hadn't meant to offend anyone and insisted it was just his way of speaking. Stack chose to finalize the purchase immediately with a suitcase full of money. Smoke clarified that it was a full payment, meaning they now owned the property and had every right to defend it, even against attacks from the Ku Klux Klan. Hogwood laughed uneasily and claimed that the Klan no longer existed. Meanwhile, Sammy attended church with his father, Jack, a strict pastor who disapproved of his son's passion for music. Jack watched with dismay as Sammy climbed into his cousin's car, guitar in hand. The twins had been living in Chicago for 7 years and were now planning to open a bar for the black community. Sammy's admiration for them grew when he saw them kill a rattlesnake with ease. In town, it became clear that the twins' reputation was mixed. A young woman walked away as soon as Smoke introduced himself, but smiled again when he paid her to watch his truck and even gave her a quick lesson in negotiation. Smoke then entered a store owned by his friend Boshow, who was surprised and excited to receive a huge order for the new bar. Suddenly, the truck's horn blared, an alert that it was being tampered with. Smoke caught 2 thieves in the act, hitting one in the back and the other in the leg. He paid Boshow to call a doctor, but quietly, as he didn't want to damage his ruthless image. Smoke also asked Boshow's daughter to bring her mother, Grace, from across the street. Grace was going to paint the bar's sign. She was a seasoned negotiator, unlike her daughter, and quickly engaged in a bidding war with Smoke until they struck a deal. Elsewhere, Stack asked Sammy to play the guitar for him and was stunned by the young man's powerful voice. He immediately saw fortune in his cousin's talent. Stack approached a harmonica player, Delta Slim, at the train station to recruit him. Slim, hesitant at first, said he had a steady gig and wasn't willing to risk it. But everything changed when Stack offered him a taste of Irish beer from Chicago. Taking advantage of the crowd on the platform, Stack had Slim and Sammy perform, using the moment to announce the upcoming bar's opening. Sammy tried to flirt with a woman named Perline, but she brushed him off, saying she was married. Meanwhile, Stack faced trouble when his ex-girlfriend Mary showed up and began cursing him for abandoning her. After the argument, Stack took Sammy and Slim to a plantation to meet his friend Cornbread, hoping to hire him as a doorman. Cornbread refused even to hear the offer and introduced his wife Teresa. When Stack didn't tone down his language in front of her, Cornbread almost turned violent. But to his surprise, Teresa herself became interested in the job and convinced her husband to consider it. Elsewhere, Smoke visited his ex-wife Annie. She immediately suspected the twins had acquired their money illegally. Their personalities clashed. Annie was spiritual, while Smoke dismissed all beliefs, bitter about the death of their baby daughter. Despite their differences, Smoke offered Annie the job of cook, and they ended the conversation on better terms. Not far away, an Irishman named Remick knocked on the door of Bert and Joan, a couple who were members of the Ku Klux Klan. Remick, tearful and burned, claimed he'd been attacked by indigenous people and was invited inside. Later, an indigenous leader came asking for Remick and warned Joan that the man was not what he seemed. One of the leader's companions reminded him that the sun was setting, so they left. Afterward, Joan called for her husband and was horrified to find him lifeless. Remick sat in the dark with a mouthful of blood and claimed he was just resting. Bert then began to rise, clearly changed, and Joan realized something terrible had occurred. Back at Club Juke, the twins' bar was nearly ready for its grand opening. Sammy was delighted to see Perline show up, especially when she mentioned her husband wouldn't be coming. He encouraged her to sing on stage, but their flirtation was cut short when Mary reappeared. Remembering her earlier argument with Stack, Sammy tried to kick her out, but lacked the intimidation of his cousins. Mary not only ignored him but got him to sit down and drink with her. When Sammy asked an awkward question about her light skin, she joked but later explained that her grandfather was mixed race, and her mother, who had also been light-skinned, was killed by the Klan. She was still grieving, especially because the Moore twins hadn't even attended the funeral, despite her mother being the midwife who had delivered them. Smoke warned Stack about Mary's presence, Stack confronted her, offering money to leave. Mary refused, saying she just wanted to enjoy the music. Slim introduced young Sammy to the crowd, and Sammy performed a heartfelt blues song dedicated to his father. The performance was so powerful that it stirred everyone, creating a spiritual connection that drew the attention of the vampire Remick. Afterward, Perline was so moved that she locked herself in a back room with Sammy. Stack noticed, but, proud of his cousin, said nothing and even called Grace over to listen from behind the door. Outside, Remick arrived with Bert and Joan, now vampires. Cornbread saw the three white strangers and immediately sensed trouble. Remick claimed to be a blues fan drawn in by Sammy's voice. Smoke asked if they were clan members, and Remick denied it. To prove their interest in music, the trio began an improvised performance. Stack laughed at their odd style, but Annie sensed something wrong. Smoke also found it suspicious and interrupted the music, asserting that the bar played blues, a different style altogether. Remick tried to win them over with money, but Smoke remained firm, suggesting they head to the white bars. Remick accused them of discrimination, asking how Mary had been allowed inside. Annie defended Mary, saying she was family. Remick suggested they could all be one big family, but Smoke placed his hand on his gun, signaling the end of the conversation. Remick retreated, warning he might return. Later, Smoke warned Sammy about the hardships of an artist's life. Sammy disagreed, saying he'd never felt more alive and even hinted at moving to Chicago. Meanwhile, Stack confessed to Mary that the bar might not survive financially. Mary suspected the money was stolen, possibly from a gangster, especially since the twins had worked for Al Capone. Stack admitted they'd defrauded two rival factions and pinned the blame on each other, but Mary wasn't convinced. She decided to investigate Remick and took Stack's revolver, hiding it under her stocking. Smoke and Sammy's discussion escalated into a heated argument. Sammy refused to abandon music and claimed the Moore family legacy was now in him. Enraged, Smoke pointed a gun at him but then calmed down. Outside, Mary found Remick and the others playing a sad tune. They greeted her warmly and showed her their money, strange coins from different times and places. Remick guessed she had recently suffered a loss and spoke of redemption, saying he had tried to save her mother. Suspicious, Mary pulled out the gun and backed away, unaware that bullets couldn't harm vampires. As she turned, still gazing at the coins, Remick prepared to strike. Mary returned to the club calmly and had Cornbread let her in. She handed the coins to Stack and began charming him. Smoke was distracted breaking up a fight, and Cornbread asked Slim to guard the door while he stepped out. Outside alone, Slim heard sinister whispers. Stack couldn't resist Mary's seduction, and the two ended up in a room where her vampire bite was visible on her shoulder. Smoke, searching for Stack, found him being drained by Mary. Confused but alarmed, he shot Mary repeatedly. She laughed off the bullets and promised everyone in the bar would die. Annie and Slim rushed to Stack's aid, but it was too late. Slim ended the party and sent everyone home. Annie insisted Stack be taken outside, but Smoke refused. Grace was terrified and asked Bo to get the car. Cornbread returned and began to act strangely, charming people. Annie challenged him, demanding he enter without invitation. He couldn't. She declared he was dead, a victim of the White Trio. Smoke offered to pay Cornbread off, but Cornbread grabbed him and tried to bite him. Smoke shot him, but the vampire rose again. Smoke fled inside, and Cornbread was unable to follow. Then Perline alerted everyone to something worse. There was pounding from inside the locked room. Only Stack was in there. As Sammy tried to get closer to the locked door, a knife suddenly pierced the wood, narrowly missing him. Stack's voice began calling out to his brother, his tone almost pleading. Smoke peered through the hole left by the knife. Annie, standing nearby, warned him sharply that wasn't his twin anymore. Stack begged to be let out, accusing Smoke of letting his wife come between them, just as she always had. Moved by guilt and doubt, Smoke turned to retrieve the key. But just as he did, Stack kicked the door down, slamming it onto Sammy and sending him sprawling. Annie immediately reacted. She shot a clove of garlic into Stack's face. The impact burned his skin, and he screamed in agony, retreating and fleeing out of the bar into the night. Everyone was shaken. Annie turned to the group and declared grimly that they were dealing with vampires. Grace was growing desperate, visibly distressed by Bo's continued absence. She wanted to go outside and search, but the others stopped her, unwilling to risk another life. The only thing left to do, Annie said, was wait until dawn and make sure no one else got in. As a precaution, they began breaking apart chairs to fashion wooden stakes and separated garlic cloves for protection. Annie solemnly explained that Stack's soul was still trapped inside that monstrous body. She insisted that the only mercy they could offer him now was to end his suffering. But Smoke wasn't ready to hear that, not yet. Sammy, meanwhile, wrestled with his guilt. He confessed that he felt responsible, that he had challenged God with his music. Slim quickly dispelled that thought, firmly telling him that he had seen the demon many times and wouldn't let it win this time. It was then that someone noticed an unconscious bar patron. Upon closer inspection, he appeared to have been bitten. Sammy helped Stack carry the man outside before he could wake. But as they stepped out into the eerie night, the two heard a low, macabre chanting. It was only then that they realized the grave mistake. They had dispersed the patrons, and now Remick had turned them all into vampires. Back inside, concerned about the bitten man, Annie decided to test everyone with garlic. One by one they complied, except Pearline, who refused to eat. Suspicion thickened in the air. Smoke pointed his gun at her, demanding the truth. Sammy stepped in to defend her and ended up getting struck in the scuffle. Finally, Pearline relented and took the garlic, passing the test. A tense silence followed, especially when Slim gagged on his clove due to the alcohol in his stomach. But he passed too. Annie and Smoke reconsidered. The supposed blood under the drunk might not have been blood at all. Then came another knock. A frightened patron begged for shelter at the back door. Just as Stack decided to open it, Cornbread, a friend-turned-vampire, attacked the man and dragged him away. At that moment, V appeared, and Grace saw the cold indifference in his eyes. She realized, horrified, that he had turned too. Remick used the distraction to slip through the gap in their defenses. He entered calmly and said he hadn't come for blood, but for the music. He explained that Sammy's gift was unique. It let him connect with other eras, which was how Remick could meet old friends again. He then revealed that Hogwood, the building's former owner, was a Ku Klux Klan leader. Worse, Bert, his nephew, had informed him that the Klan was planning an attack on the bar by morning. Even Stack joined the conversation, trying to convince the others that vampirism was salvation for the oppressed. Smoke was visibly shaken to see his brother like this. For a moment, it seemed he might waver. But his friends pulled him back from the brink and slammed the door shut once more. But it was Grace who lost control. Enraged by everyone's hesitation and terrified for her daughter back home, she opened the front door wide and shouted a collective invitation, allowing all the vampires in. What followed was chaos. The bar was instantly overrun. Parallel battles broke out across the floor. Stakes were driven into chests. Screams filled the smoky air. Grace, having found Bose among the undead, drove a stake into his heart. Then, with no hope left, she let herself burn along with him. Annie fought with all the weapons she had prepared. But Stack bit her during the struggle. As her body began to change, she turned to Smoke and reminded him of his promise. With a breaking heart, Smoke drove a stake through her chest as she started to rise again. Even in her monstrous form, Mary, now turned, was devastated. She screamed Annie's name and tried to save her, but Stack pulled her away as fire engulfed the room. Slim, realizing the end was near, shouted for the others to escape and stayed behind, sacrificing himself to buy them time. Pearline, Smoke, and Sammy escaped to the upstairs floor, only to be intercepted by Remick and Stack. A violent showdown ensued. The twins clashed in a brutal fight. Pearline tried to help Sammy against Remick, but she was bitten. Remick chased Sammy to the river, where a twisted ritual began, a mock baptism surrounded by vampires. As Remick prepared to transform him, Sammy whispered a prayer and smashed his guitar over Remick's head. The explosion of sound weakened the creatures, but not enough to end them. Just as Remick lunged at Sammy again, a wooden stake suddenly pierced his chest from behind. Smoke had returned. He had come to save his cousin at the last moment. Then the sun finally rose. Remick and the gathered vampires burst into flame, their bodies turning to ash in a fiery crescendo. Smoke and Sammy embraced, watching their enemies burn and dissolve in the light. Afterward, they parted. Smoke remained behind to prepare for the second wave, Hogwood and the Klansmen. When they arrived at the bar, they were met with a hail of gunfire. Smoke used every weapon he had stashed in his truck. He killed them all, but not without being shot himself. Bleeding, he lit a cigarette and asked Hogwood for one final drag, before pulling the trigger and joining his family in death. Elsewhere, Sammy interrupted his father's sermon with a dramatic entrance. His father accused him once again of inviting the demon through music, and ordered him to drop the broken piece of guitar he still clutched tightly. But Sammy chose music. He kept playing. He played until old age. 60 years after that terrible night, Sammy received two visitors, Stack and Mary. Stack told him the truth. Smoke hadn't been able to kill his brother. Instead, he had only made Stack promise never to hurt Sammy. And now, at the end of his life, Stack offered him immortality, to play forever. Sammy refused. But before they parted, he made peace with his cousin and picked up the guitar one last time, playing the same song that had once impressed Stack all those years ago. What did you think? Did the ending surprise you, or were you expecting it all along? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next movie breakdown. Want more? Check out our recap of similar movie right here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.